Hello. In this review, we'll be talking about the Japanese family of air-to-air missiles known as AAM. The series includes 5 versions, from the AAM-1 to the AAM-5. As you can see from the name, it follows the same designation style the US used during the development stage of its own missile projects, such as the AIM-4 Falcon and several others. And that's no coincidence. Japan truly wanted to create counterparts to America's short-range air-to-air missiles, basing them on well-proven designs already in use by the US Air Force. Today, I'll cover this in detail, explain what each version represents, and explore their capabilities. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click like. It helps us make better content. Let's burn. The history of this missile essentially began in 1960, when the Japanese government decided to purchase the F-104 Starfighter interceptor from the United States. The Japan Air Self-Defense Force needed a fighter that could serve as its mainstay and be used to gain air superiority in the region. The Japanese version was designated the F-104J. In 1961, the first aircraft built for Japan was completed and delivered from the US that same year. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries was granted a license to manufacture the aircraft in Japan. The plan was for components to be supplied from the US, while final assembly would take place at Mitsubishi's facilities. The F-104J could carry and use up to 4 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. These missiles, specifically the AIM-9B Sidewinder variant that had entered service in 1956, were supplied to Japan along with the aircraft. In 1966, the F-104J officially entered service in Japan and began operating with the AIM-9B Sidewinder. A year later, after gaining experience with the Sidewinder and learning both its strengths and shortcomings, Japan decided it would be worthwhile to develop its own missile in this class for the Air Self-Defense Force. The task was once again assigned to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. The AIM-9B was chosen as the starting point, and development of the AAM-1 began. 2 years later, the missile was officially adopted. Its configuration was as follows. In the nose sat an infrared seeker head. Here, the Japanese addressed some of the AIM-9B's problems. For those unfamiliar, the American missile had significant limitations. Due to the seeker's design, it could only lock onto and hit targets from behind, had cooling issues, and was prone to being fooled by flares. In poor weather, it was nearly unusable. The Japanese improved the seeker by adding a cooling system and making it somewhat better at locking onto targets compared to the AIM-9B. Behind the seeker was the guidance section, followed by a 4.5 kilograms warhead. On the outside of the body were X-shaped control fins. At the rear was a solid fuel rocket motor, with X-shaped stabilizers mounted externally. The AAM-1 measured 2.59 meters in length, 0.13 meters in diameter, and weighed 70 kilograms. Its speed reached about Mach 2, which is about 2,450 kilometers per hour. The effective engagement range was between 5 and 7 kilometers, depending on conditions, roughly comparable to the Sidewinder's capabilities at the time. Between 1969 and 1972, around 450 AAM-1 missiles were produced. In Japan, the missile was also designated Type 69, referencing the year it entered service. Over its 3 years of active use, it demonstrated itself to be a missile with very limited capabilities and many drawbacks, particularly regarding the seeker's performance, effectiveness against maneuvering targets, and engagement range. Still, at that time, alongside the AIM-9B, the AAM-1 was considered standard armament for the F-104J. It was also used on the F-86F and later the Mitsubishi F-1. A major issue with the AAM-1 was cost. By the late 1960s, producing one AAM-1 cost roughly 4 times more than simply purchasing an AIM-9B from the US, considering that their performance differences weren't fundamental. This price tag was unjustifiable. As a result, Japan soon sought to develop an improved missile whose higher cost would be offset by significantly better performance. The AAM-1 was finally retired from service in 1986. Another agreement with the US in the late 1960s further influenced Japan's decision to create a second version of its missile. In 1968, Japan purchased another well-known US fighter bomber, the F-4E Phantom. In Japanese service it was designated the F-4EJ, and along with it came AIM-4D Falcon missiles. These two were equipped with infrared seekers. With the arrival of the Falcon in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force arsenal, the decision was made to once again use an American missile as the basis for developing a domestic version, this time, the AAM-2. If you compare the Falcon and the AAM-2 visually, you'll immediately notice their similarities, as well as the clear differences between Japan's first missile, the AAM-1, and this second attempt. In 1970, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries began work on the AAM-2. Like the Falcon, it used an infrared seeker, but this one was more advanced. It could engage targets not only from the rear but also from the front and side. The Japanese missile was fitted with a more powerful solid-fuel rocket motor than the Falcon's. Unlike the American missile, which only had a contact fuse, the AAM-2 also included a proximity fuse, an important improvement given the relatively small warhead size. The guidance unit was more refined overall, allowing the missile to hit more maneuverable targets. By 1973, about 40 AAM-2 prototypes had been produced and tested by the Air Self-Defense Force, with another 20 built by 1975. That year, however, the program was abandoned without the missile ever entering service. It remained at the prototype stage. One of the main reasons was that Japan had begun licensed production of the American AIM-9L Sidewinder. And after the Vietnam War, the US had a surplus of these missiles, which it was eager to sell at favorable prices. Compared to the AIM-9L, the AAM-2 was far more expensive to produce. As a result, Japan chose to adopt the Sidewinder instead. However, even before Japan abandoned the AAM-2 project completely, research had already begun in 1974 on the possibility of creating a further development of the AAM-1. This was to become the AAM-3. By 1978, 3 different design proposals for the new missile had been submitted, all handled once again by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. But in terms of performance, it wasn't significantly better than the American Sidewinder, while its projected cost was once again extremely high. For that reason, all work on the AAM-3 was suspended, and Japan continued importing and producing the AIM-9L under license. By the mid-1980s, it had become clear that the AIM-9L was outdated and that a new missile was needed to meet modern requirements. The old AAM-3 project was revived, and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries was tasked once again with developing a short-range missile that could hit maneuvering targets at greater distances than Japan's earlier models. Work on this new AAM-3 officially began in 1985. Its design benchmarks were set against the AIM-9M, especially regarding the seeker head and cooling system, but in terms of range and maneuverability, it was meant to surpass the AIM-9L. In 1986, funding was allocated for the development and construction of the first prototype, which was completed that same year. In 1987, another $47 million was allocated for further development and the creation of a second prototype, which was also completed within the year. Additional funding in 1988 and 1989 supported the production of prototypes for flight testing. By 1990, a total of 18 prototypes had been built. That same year, the AAM-3 was officially adopted into service, under the designation Type 90, and entered serial production. Deliveries to the Japan Air Self-Defense Force began in 1991. The AAM-3 differed from the first Japanese missile both in size and in several design details. It weighed 90.7 kilograms, measured 3.1 meters in length, and had a diameter of 0.127 meters. To address the old Sidewinder issue of being easily confused by flares, the AAM-3 was equipped with a dual infrared, ultraviolet seeker and an improved cooling system. The addition of a UV channel made it possible to distinguish between real aircraft and many types of flares, though at the cost of shorter detection range, more dependence on weather conditions, and reduced effectiveness in some scenarios. The seeker also had a wider gimbal angle than earlier Japanese missiles. Externally, the missile retained X-shaped forward control fins, but now with serrated edges, which increased maneuverability and improved its ability to hit agile targets. These fins were longer than those on the AAM-1. The warhead was a new 15 kg directional fragmentation type, paired with a laser proximity fuse. A domestically produced solid-fuel rocket motor provided propulsion, allowing the missile to reach speeds of up to Mach 2.5, it's around 3,060 km per hour, with an effective range of up to 13 km. At the rear were X-shaped stabilizers. The AAM-3 could be carried by the F-4EJ, F-15J, and later the Mitsubishi F-2. For a certain period, it became Japan's main short-range air-to-air missile. In 1991, when the third version of Japan's missile, the AAM-3, was just beginning to enter service with the Air Self-Defense Force, work also started on yet another design. This would eventually become the AAM-5. I'll explain later why I skipped the AAM-4. The idea was to keep the general dimensions of the AAM-3 but equip it with a seeker more resistant to countermeasures, and to install an improved motor that would allow for greater engagement range. However, the development of this missile turned into a long and difficult story. It took more than a decade, hindered by budget problems, technical challenges in creating a suitable seeker, and repeated debates within Japan about whether such a missile was even needed, especially since the country was acquiring AIM-120 AMRAAMs from the United States. The AMRAAM, with its medium range and advanced guidance, already outperformed the AAM-3 and what Japan initially hoped to achieve with the AAM-5. Originally, the first AAM-5 prototype was expected by 1993, but this didn't happen. Funding and full-scale development kept being postponed to 1994, then 1995. Only in 1998 was funding finally approved, allowing proper development to move forward. The first prototypes appeared in 2000, and flight tests from F-15J began in 2001. Ultimately, the AAM-5 reached operational readiness in 2004. It entered production and service under the designation Type 04. The AAM-5 weighed 95 kilograms, with a 15 kilograms warhead, unchanged from the AAM-3. It still used an infrared seeker, building on the same principles as the AAM-3, and retained a laser proximity fuse. Stabilizers were placed along the missile's body, but the control fins were moved to the tail section. A more powerful solid fuel motor was installed, giving the AAM-5 a maximum speed of Mach 3, it's around 3,675 km per hour, and a range of up to 35 km. Another key addition was an inertial navigation system, improving its targeting flexibility. In 2010, a modernization program was launched to create the AAM-5B. The main goal was to extend the seeker's cooling time. By 2016, the AAM-5B was ready for service, and deliveries to the Air Self-Defense Force began in 2017. Along with doubling the seeker's cooling endurance, this version also featured a more advanced seeker that could better recognize and lock onto targets in poor or cloudy weather, as well as an improved guidance section. Longer cooling times gave aircraft more tactical safety, allowing them to fire from farther away without entering the enemy's air defense envelope. Both versions, the AAM-5 and AAM-5B, remain actively in use in Japan today. Now we need to go back to 1994, when Mitsubishi Heavy Industries began work on a missile to replace the AIM-7 Sparrow, which was also in service with Japan. This was the start of the AAM-4 program. The story is somewhat similar to the AAM-2, but this time with a successful outcome. The goal was to design a missile capable of engaging targets beyond visual range, equipped with an active radar seeker. If you compare the AIM-7 and the AAM-4 visually, you'll notice certain similarities. Work on this version, and its funding, in fact delayed development of the AAM-5. By 1999, the AAM-4 had reached operational readiness and was adopted into service. It was also designated as the Type 99. In the nose section sits an active radar seeker capable of detecting and locking on to targets at up to 15 kilometers. Behind it is the guidance unit with an inertial navigation system, followed by the warhead and a proximity fuse. X-shaped wings are positioned mid-body, and at the rear is a solid fuel rocket motor, with X-shaped tail fins mounted externally. The AAM-4 is 3.66 meters long, 0.2 meters in diameter, and weighs 222 kilograms. Its warhead weighs 16.7 kilograms, producing 600 fragments on detonation. The missile can reach speeds of Mach 4.5, it's around 5,512 kilometers per hour, with a maximum range of 85 kilometers. Initially, it was deployed on the F-15J fighter. In the 2000s, Japan decided to give this missile even greater capability, taking a radical step no one had previously attempted with such weapons: installing a radar seeker with an active electronically scanned array. This would allow more precise targeting of various threats in all weather conditions, while an improved motor would extend engagement range. In 2010, the AAM-4B variant appeared, entered service, and began deliveries to the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. To use it, Mitsubishi F-2 fighters had to be upgraded with an improved active electronically scanned array radar, the JAPG-2, replacing the earlier JAPG-1. 60 aircraft were modified for this purpose, enabling them to carry the AAM-4B. As soon as Japan introduced it, comparisons began with the American AIM 120D AMRAAM. The AAM-4B's estimated maximum range is 105 to 120 kilometers, with its seeker able to detect and lock targets at up to 21 kilometers. Japan considered purchasing F-35 fighters from the US, but the problem with the AAM-4 was its size. It was too bulky for the internal bay of the F-35. Yet Japan wanted to use its own Beyond Visual Range missile with the aircraft, similar in performance to MBDA's Meteor. This led to a 2014 agreement with the UK to develop a joint missile, the JNAAM, which stands for Joint New Air-to-Air Missile. The idea was to combine the Meteor's motor with the AAM-4B's seeker. By 2018, work shifted to prototypes, and by the early 2020s the next testing phase had begun. Entry into service was originally planned for 2023, but several issues pushed the timeline closer to 2030. Another complication is that the AAM-4B is only compatible with the JAPG-2 radar, which is not planned for installation on Japan's F-35. Hence the JNAAM also needs to be compatible with the F-35's radar. It's not only China that develops weapons by analogy. Japan has achieved the same, but on a different level. These missiles are still in service today, with clear potential for future upgrades, which are sure to come. We'll tell that story when the time comes. So, that was the AAM missile family. I'm sure this video was interesting and informative for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click like. That's all from me. Wishing you clear skies. Goodbye.